Alrighty folks, it's time. Since there was so much positive support for at least having a gander at a resto project for my watchmaking hobby, obsession, whatever it may turn into be, here you go. The idea is, this is not my first restoration, it's also not the latest, but it is one I did recently. And it's some interesting lessons, and caveat, of course, here, since the first time I'm doing this, I don't exactly have HD video capability. I'm kind of doing this with just my webcam, not my webcam, my iPhone. It's not an iPhone, smartphone, that's what I'm trying to say. So again, pardon the shaky cam if there is any, pardon the lack of resolution to the extent that it becomes a problem, but at least hopefully you get an idea of the sort of thing that watchmaking takes on. If this becomes popular, maybe we'll enhance the quality of optics, etc, etc, etc. But for now, let's jump into it. The story of my little Seiko, what I'm calling my Japanese Rolex. So a couple weeks back, I saw the following up on everyone's favorite auction site, eBay. No, they're not paying me. It looked like a nice 70s Seiko, Seiko 5 actually, automatic, with a nice movement, and looked like it was in pretty good shape, aesthetically in particular. And even the movement didn't seem to have anything too broken from it, based on the pics. Guy said it wasn't working, I said, I can fix that. Such began the saga of the shiny golden Seiko. So I finally get my hands on the thing and tried to use the stem and crown to see what functions were functional and what were not, to give me an idea of what I would see once I cracked it open. And the first thing that happened is that the crown and stem decided they didn't want to see each other anymore and should see other people, and fell out. And split apart. This did not bode well as a start. Still, you know, that's a minor issue. Could we do something with the keyless work? So I chalked it up to a guy didn't know what he was doing. But now I'm worried that he might have tried to do something internally. So I popped the movement out of the case now that the stem was loose, flipped it over, and tried to get the dial off. This was getting difficult. Where were the dial stems? What's going on? And my worst fears were confirmed. Someone tried to do something internally that didn't know what they were doing, and decided to cover up his mistake by gluing the dial to the spacer with crappy epoxy. Now I'm really worried that this might have leaked internally and screwed up something serious. No wonder watch was listed as no working. So I'll spare you all the gory details of the actual disassembly, and here's all the parts after cleaning and ready for reassembly, which we'll go through step by step. So mercifully, the epoxy didn't leak into the movement, and it seems to be more or less okay, but I noticed a giant scuff on the bridge, which looks like someone tried to use a screwdriver to open it up, and skipped off of it and hit the hairspring, which had a giant kink in it, and that's why the watch wasn't working. Hairspring couldn't turn, it was bent. Looks like we'll need to do a heart transplant, and then maybe one day when I get the patience, I'll see if I can fix the hairspring and salvage it for another movement. Who knows? In any event, it's time to put this sucker back together. So first things first, there is the clean, bare movement plate, the base plate that everything goes on. Flip to the backside where all the action is. The first thing we're going to do is start assembling the gear train. Now, in other movements, especially Swiss ones, on the older side, putting the bridge that'll hold all the gears in place involves placing every single tiny pinion and pivot into the right holes and making sure that piece of metal keeps them all nice and tight. Sometimes that's difficult, but Seiko, in their infinite wisdom, doesn't do that. They kind of break up the bridges a little bit and help you place the gears themselves a little easier. So honestly, this is a bit simpler. As you can see, the gear that runs the minutes, as well as the escape wheel, which is the pointy one in the upper left, those are put in place first with this first small bridge, and then the rest of the wheels are built on top of that with the major bridge going on top of those. Makes the whole process a little easier. And next step, 2 more wheels of the gear train are placed where they're supposed to go through the little pip holes, as well as what you see in the lower right corner, that big old wheel, that is a barrel which holds the mainspring, which is the power for the entire watch. Again, on the Swiss movements, or of this era at least, the train wheels and the train of wheels, or the train wheels, I guess, are under one bridge, and the mainspring barrel is technically under a separate bridge very often. I don't want to say always, but many times, especially for the generic movements. Seiko integrates both under one, which is an interesting choice. integration is going to be a heck of a thing. You'll see more as we put the movement further and further together. Another unique thing Seiko does is they use a lot of the keyless works, which is basically what controls the crown, how it's held into the watch and how it regulates the various functions, and the springs that go with it. They integrate it on the back of the plate. Again, on the common Swiss movements of the era, it's on the top side. Another unique thing, we have to assemble this before we do anything else with the bridges. Go figure. And so the next step is to put in place the bridge that'll hold the train of wheels, as well as the barrel in place, as well as a click spring, which will help us store the power of the barrel once it's wound, or the mainspring rather, and that's that thin piece of metal you see laying across the barrel in the bottom corner of the frame. And once you've aligned everything just right, if you take a piece of pegwood, which for me is a toothpick, and gently touch the barrel, you'll see all the wheels turning freely under a minimal application of power. You don't want to do this too fast because you can burn the pivots. But man, this is one of the most satisfying feelings when you've got those train wheels aligned just right. So you know how I mentioned integration being a theme with the Seiko movement. You'll notice on top of that bridge is that weird thing with the two antennae. That is part of the automatic winding system because that's integrated there. And you can see in the next step we've added the gear that controls the click on top of the barrel, as well as the, I guess, one-stage reversing gear that they use up top. It's a very clever design actually, without layering multiple gears. And you'll see that as I move this wheel again very gently with the tweezers, that reversing gear always moves and winds the barrel in the same direction. Pretty neat. Next step's to put in the pallet fork. What's a pallet fork? That's the pallet fork. Tiny little piece that controls the power delivery to the train of wheels via the escape wheel. Remember that spiky one we showed you last time? So once that's installed here, you can use again a gentle piece of pegwood and wind up the mainspring to see if everything is working properly. And by kind of gently touching the back end of it, you can have the escape wheel advance tooth by tooth, see that everything is working properly. In this case, it is. Again, not a lot of power here, so it's not snapping back and forth. But again, I didn't want to do too much, just a little bit of wind to make sure everything is working properly. All right, now the fun bit. We got to fit a balance. And this is the ticking that you hear in the watch, is the balance knocking that pallet fork back and forth and gradually releasing the power. And this is what times your watch if you have a mechanical one. Now remember, I said the hairspring, which is the narrow spring that lets it oscillate back and forth, was damaged on the original watch that I got. But luckily I had a compatible movement, not identical, a 7009A compared to the 7S26 that I'm working on, but the balance wheels are the same. And I took it out of my parts drawer, and here we are testing it with a gentle bit of air from my hand bellows, little trick I like to use. And yep, looks like it's a free spinning happy balance ready for transplant. And here we are post-transplant. We see the watch jump to life even with the little bit of power that's in the mainspring. The balance is whipping back and forth, ticking it along and making sure everything is driven properly. Beautiful sight to see, and makes all the work up to this point worth it. Now, before we move on, I want to talk a little bit about oiling. I've been sparing you the details of that because every little purple/red gem that you see is a synthetic ruby. So you use those to avoid friction and make sure there's a hard, minimally friction surface for the pivots to run on, and for that you need to oil them. They're brittle, but they're also very, 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 very hard. It's like a sapphire actually, but you know, it looks red, so it's a ruby. And you have to oil each one of these with specific oils. Now, I only mention it now because the sapphire setting on the balance is very, very unique, and it's very important. It's called an Inca block setting, or something that absorbs shocks. Now, the idea behind an Inca block setting is that if you happen to drop your watch or strike it against something very hard, rather than having the very fine and like human hair fine metal pivot and the body of whatever pivot you're running on strike the gem and potentially crack it, because like I said, it's very hard but also very brittle. The idea is that fine little brass spring on top will absorb the impact instead and allow everything to stay whole. It's kind of like a shock absorber for your watch. That's the idea. And in order to oil it, you need to take it apart, clean it, and then reassemble it. And this is micro scale work. You'll see comparatively what I'm talking about. Here you see the balance with the gem and Inca block setting removed. You just see the bare metal pivot sitting in that bowl where the Inca block setting goes, and if you were to drop the watch now, you would probably damage the pivot or you know, the fine little bits that go underneath there, and you probably need to replace that, or you can even damage the balance in the spring itself. And here in the still frame you can see how fine that hairspring is, and this is exactly what drives and times the balance, and what the guy who previously owned the watch damaged when I think he foolishly tried to open it without knowing what he was doing. So here's the setting disassembled. We can't see the spring in this one, but the left side is the capstone. That's what sits and locks it up from the top, and that the spring sits on. Underneath is the setting, that tiny fine little hole where the pivot goes through and rotates in, and that's the part we're going to make sure the oil reaches. So the way you do this is you put a tiny drop of oil on that left top hole, you flip that setting on the right side on top of it, seat it, you put it back on top of that metal assembly that you see remaining in the movement, and then you push the spring back on top gently so you don't bend or break anything. Just so you understand the scale and size of this, that's my finger. You have 3 seconds to guess what finger. 2, 3. Yeah, that's my pinky. That's how small this work is. And again, a quick zoom in on the spring that goes on top of this whole assembly, and once it's all put together, there it is, swinging very freely in the watch body. This is just with the application of a little bit of air, and it's still going. There's no power in the watch at this point, basically. Yeah, looks good. So that's the back fully assembled. I just added the oscillating weight, that big metal plaque that winds the watch as you move your wrist that you saw at the beginning, and put on the dial spacer, and we flip it to the top side to start doing the motion work. These are the things that'll run the hands of the watch. And as I mentioned before, all the little holes are properly oiled, the settings are done, now we're starting to assemble the motion work. Now we have all the wheels that drive the hands, so there's a tiny center seconds pinion, the minutes under that, and then the hour wheel under that, and the stuff to the left, or the upper left rather, are things that drive the day and date, which this watch has a capability for. So these are all starting to come together now. Again, greased up properly, put on their poles, and ready for the next step. Now we got the same assembly now with the crown and crown wheels in place, as well as the crown itself. Thanks to the keyless works that we did on the back, it's all fit as a fiddle and ready to go. And now we're going to start assembling the day and date wheels so we can get the sucker working. And so there's the date wheel, along with the top sprung retaining plate. And now we have the whole date assembly here with the crown working. As you can see, pulled out, we can control and set the days and date as needed. Beautiful stuff. All right, all that's left is to assemble the dial and the hands. And there we go. Dial is put in place properly this time, cleaned up, hands are polished up and fitted, and the whole thing is ticking away beautifully. So, movement's done, dial is done, hands are done. Time to throw the case and the bracelet into the ultrasonic washer to give it a good shine, and we're going to assemble the whole thing to a final product. And there we go. What started as a broken Seiko 5 automatic with a bent hairspring and some epoxy on the dial has turned into a happily ticking watch that I have affectionately dubbed my Japanese Rolex because of the gold bling and honestly how nice it looks aesthetically. I think this is a really nice little watch. I'm very happy with it. And hopefully you enjoyed this little journey through the watchmaking process. Now obviously there's steps left out. I didn't record everything because I kind of did this off the cuff just to see if people are interested. But if this is interesting content and you want to see more, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Love to hear your thoughts. Any questions, obviously happy to answer. And again, caveating everything you've seen here, I'm not a professional watchmaker by any stretch yet. I'm still learning a lot. So, don't take anything I say, as set in stone, but hopefully what this shows is that if you put your mind to it, you can pick up something interesting and intricate like this and have a lot of fun with it and come out with something on the other end that you can be proud of, which I'm actually ecstatic about how this one turned out. Very happy with it. It's been on my wrist a lot the last couple days. So, again, thank you all for tuning in to this journey through this just one restoration that I've done. And hopefully, if people like it, we'll do some more, and we'll do some more other watchmaking content, start seeing how I'm trying to put together my own custom watch and machining the dial and hands and case and everything on my home mill and CNC setup, all these things we can kind of explore later if people are interested in seeing how it's done. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. I've been Urs. It's been a pleasure sharing this part of my life with you, and hopefully you enjoyed it as well. And look forward to hearing your thoughts down below. Alrighty, till next time, take care.